Hi, everyone. I don't know if you guys heard, but we're going to be giving away a Galaxy tablet after this. And I just heard that if you guys aren't sitting like in the first 4 or 5 tables, that you're not eligible for that. So, just FYI. So thank you, Trevor, for that great introduction. I appreciate it. You know, you guys are probably sick of hearing my name. I certainly am sick of hearing my name today. And on Tuesday, as I was preparing this presentation, I got really, really nervous. And for those of you that know me, I do this a fair amount, and I generally don't get very, very nervous. But I was full on, head between my knees, breathing, hoping to avoid a panic attack. And I started thinking about, you know, I'm a very analytic person, right? So I started thinking about, why am I this nervous about this presentation? I mean, this is content I know, right? And I realized the reason I was so nervous is because this is really important to me. You guys are really important to me. This event is very important to me. And I certainly didn't want to tie up this incredible day with all these incredible speakers by putting you all to sleep. So I was very nervous, and I appreciate your time this afternoon. I know that many of you are probably just staying because you might win a Galaxy Tab, but I'm going to pretend you're all here just for me, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it. So I generally walk away from these events very energized, right? I understand I had that in common with Steve Jobs. It's likely the only thing I had in common with Steve Jobs, but I'm going to go with it because I'll take it. And I remember about 8 years ago, I went to this conference, and I just came back. I was so energized by all the stuff I learned, right? It's this great, incredible stuff that I could take back, and it was tangible, and I was going to take back to my program, and I was going to change everything, right? And on the plane ride back, I threw up this elaborate plan of all the things I was going to do, and Monday morning I get to work, I'm charging in. Yes, I'm going to change my world. And employee called in sick. Okay, whatever. Then a friend of mine from my IT group called me up and said, yeah, you know, we figured out that data quality problem we were having last week. And it turns out that we were inadvertently dropping all the data that ended in 1. It's a true story. It's a true story. And then a little bit later, a developer on the project came up to me and he said, you know what, I'm pretty sure we're going to be weeks, if not months late on this project. And it was 9:15 in the morning on Monday, and my energy was gone. That plan ended up in a pile of something, right? And I never went back to it. I mean, it took me weeks, months, maybe even before I went back to it. And, you know, I realized as I was thinking about this, we're all in that same situation right now, right? We're exhausted, sapped, really, from all of the things that are happening in our industry. Oh, shoot, I forgot that one. We're really sapped from all of the new things that are coming into our industry. And we have to figure out how to take advantage of this brave new world that we're in with all these new regulatory requirements. And I've watched this BI industry in the last couple of years really go from a back office, you know, Department of Data Geeks to a frontline executive tool. And that's what we're all in front of. In a lot of ways, we have all these new regulatory influxes, and all of our executives are suddenly really interested in data quality, and it's just really hard to manage all of that. So I hope that as we talk today, we'll come away with some great tools. I have to add this slide in here. I forgot I added it. It was one of my last ones. So I was telling you on Tuesday I was really nervous, right? Full-blown panic attack, head between the knees. Wednesday morning, I'm checking out my bloggers that I always check out, and a blogger that I follow quite frequently, Jennifer Denard, had this in her profile. Just this quote, right? Giving a bad presentation is tantamount to mental abuse. And I just thought to myself, okay, that's it. That's a sign from God that I'm not supposed to do this presentation. I hope I get malaria or something. Thankfully, I didn't get malaria. And I hope that I'm not mentally abusing any of you. So the point is that we really need to find our energy. And events like this can help influx, you know, create that influx of energy for us as we tackle this shift in our industry from really this back office department to this frontline executive tool. So as we have lurched ahead in our industry as a result of the ICD-10 conversion and the meaningful use imperative and the ACOs, so we've lurched ahead without too much consideration for the path in front of us. We've all sort of just been along for the ride, right? And it's really, really hard because it's not that any of these things are the wrong thing to do. It's that they are all exactly the right thing to do. But they're all happening right now. And they all have similar impacts to our data warehousing and BI environments. And it reminded me of a bumper sticker I saw in Wisconsin growing up. And if you can't see it there, it says, "Get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on." And that's very much the situation that we're in today. Not a very good feeling, by the way. So, a tidbit about me, in case you want to know more information about me after the end of today, you probably won't, but I'm a pessimist by training. I'm an analyst by training. And I'm a realist by nature, and I'm an optimist on Friday afternoons. Catch me tomorrow at about 12:30. But I am all the time a pragmatist, right? And that inclination has driven me nearly to the brink of insanity in the last 18 months. It has been really difficult to be a pragmatist in this industry as we've all tried to figure out what's happening and make these moves, right? And as we have all of this influx of this activity, right, all of our new regulatory requirements and the ACO and all of that, we're looking around and we're trying to figure out how we're going to do this. And we're all very overwhelmed. At least that's what I'm hearing when I fly around the country and talk to other healthcare organizations. I hear this, we're all overwhelmed. And the thing is that there's too much riding on our success. We have to be able to pull this off. But what do? We can't quit. Look around. We're all drowning in the same sea of data. So don't bother going to another organization. Just look across the table. They're in the same situation you are, right? The truth of the matter is, with all this activity, with all of these changing strategic perspectives, even our executives aren't sure where to go next, right? In healthcare, we're generally pretty good about planning things. We're plodding along, considering our approach, and making these great plans. But lately, it has really had so much activity coming at us that it's been very, very hard to plan. And all of a sudden, it feels very much like an emergency department. There's so many things rushing at us and so many things coming in the door, right? And triaging them only makes us realize that they're all critical. They're all in a critical state. All of our projects are important. You can't give up the ICD-10 conversion because you've got the ACO thing happening and you have to finish meaningful use. All of our patients are critical. And they're all coming in the door. And the thing is, we can't all handle them at the same time. That's a really tough situation to be in. The changes, they are coming. I don't know, honestly. I don't have any secret intel for you as far as whether or not regulatory changes will happen and slow down and make our lives a lot easier. But what I do know for sure is that healthcare BI is no longer a back office function, right? We are all getting the attention that we've been wanting for many, many years. Maybe too much of it now. So these changes are happening and the things are shifting. Most important thing that we have as a responsibility in healthcare organizations is to get the work done. And the fact of the matter is, we have everything that we need to radically change this industry and the organizations that we work in. We just have to get out of our own way. And that's really hard. It's really hard. So, I don't know if you guys heard, but I wrote a book. Bad joke, I know. Yeah, I really am sorry, guys. I swear you won't hear my name for the rest of the year. So, the deal with this book, right, is I have not cracked any long-held industry belief or any secret code. The fact of the matter is, when I was looking around at these healthcare organizations that I travel to, I was shocked at how many of them aren't covering the basic BI functions. Just weren't doing it. They just weren't thinking about it. And they'd call me up and they'd be like, well, how come this is failing? Well, I don't know. What did you do? Oh, well, we missed this one thing, right? I was really surprised at the degree to which the organizations weren't really thinking about some of these things. So these are really pretty basic. I look around the room. I know a lot of you guys. I know a lot of you have been doing this work a long time. You're probably looking at me like, yep, absolutely. You're right. We should be doing all those things. You're right. I haven't cracked any secret code. But I'm guessing that as many of you are probably looking at that stuff and saying, you know what? I know all those 5 things. You're absolutely right, but maybe we didn't do 1 or 2 very well. And maybe we purposefully made that choice, right? Maybe we purposely made that choice because we ran out of time, we didn't have the money, we didn't have the resources, so we decided to skip one of them. Maybe we just didn't have a leader, or we didn't worry about the sponsorship right away. We maybe started providing value early on, but then we stopped for whatever reason. It's got below the waterline work, right? You look at that and you be really honest with yourself. Maybe you skipped 1 or 2, and maybe that's why things are struggling a little bit for you. Nothing really radical here, but all of them are critically important. And these activities, I call them the 5 tenets of healthcare BI, are the things that you have to do now. They're the things you do in the first year of a healthcare BI program, right? They're not the things that you do in year 2. I didn't write about master data management, right? The reason I didn't write about master data management isn't because it's not important. Of course it's important, but you don't do it in year 1. You got to have a data governance process up and running. You have to have a process in which to handle that. And it left the door open for book 2. So with these 5 activities, these 5 tenets, very basic things, right? And we'll go through each of these together in some more detail. But as I was thinking about these tenets and the organizations that I work with, I decided to come up with a mantra for 2012. These tenets are great and they're really pretty basic, but you know, it's a lot of words, right? And a mantra is just sort of invigorating and very strategic. So here's my, oh no, that's not my mantra. Serenity, no! Here's my mantra. Meaningful, practical, focused. It's incredibly important. And CMS kind of ruined that first word for me. I'll never be able to use that word again without thinking about the opposite of meaningful, right? How does that happen? How does an organization take a word and make it mean something else with a big pile of other words? I don't know how that works, but I apologize. I really mean meaningful in the actual Webster's dictionary sense of meaningful. It's so important for us to think about this kind of thing, right? Meaningful from a tenant's perspective, or these 5 activities, it's really about the data quality and the value aspect. You got to hit the mark. And the funny thing is about healthcare organizations is that we are all so focused on data quality. It's so important to us. 90% of the time when I go to a new healthcare company, first thing out of their mouth is, how do I fix my data quality issues? How do I fix my data quality issues? Because every time my executives get in the same room, they have 3 or 4 different numbers. And I don't understand why we have 13 different definitions of a patient to remember. Right? So we gotta figure out how to do that. That's the meaningful part. And the value associated with these programs is incredible. The things that we can do with the data is incredible. But we got to hit the mark. We got to hit our businesses where they're at. At the end of the day, healthcare is still a business, right? And if we're not giving them the valuable things for their business, then we're probably not doing our job. And I'm not talking about the valuable things that you think are valuable today or tomorrow or even a month from now or 6 months from now. I'm talking about the things that are valuable a year from now, 18 months from now. You got to think about value in the context of the future. We have to be practical. And this is the hardest thing. I promise you, almost everyone in this room looks at me, is going to look at me and say, yeah, this is a problem for us. I can't go to my executives and tell them I can't do the work because I don't have enough resources, because they're not going to care. They still want all the metrics associated with the ACOs, the meaningful use stage 2 done, and I still have to figure out my ICD-10 conversion for whatever date they've picked now. right? They don't care that you're down 1 FTE, and then they added a couple projects, and now you're down 2 FTEs. You know, and then it just keeps going, right? Pretty soon you're down 2 FTEs, and the third FTE just ran away. Ran to your competitor. That's okay, there's the same sea of data over there. They'll survive the honeymoon and we'll be good to go. Fact of the matter is we have to have these conversations with our executives. There's scope, cost, and schedule, you gotta pick them. Which one's the most important to you? Because the other two are going to have to be negotiable. Those are the only 3 levers that we have. It's a really hard conversation to have, I know that. But if we're practical about this, if we focus on what's meaningful, if we focus on the data quality and making sure that our business users, our folks that are using the system are getting what they need, and we're practical about that and we just keep iterating through that activity, right? And keep giving them stuff all the time. Nothing big, but little things all the time. It's going to get you a lot further than spinning your wheels, spinning your hamster wheels. We have to maintain focus. I'm probably the worst person at this, by the way. Honestly. If you've ever worked with me, I've had plenty of people give me feedback like, gosh, you're just always so freaked out. Yes, but it's so important. Everything's so important. So a couple of years I had an epiphany. It was really like one of those like, oh, moments. There's no such thing as a data emergency. Seriously, you are the quietest group. Wow. Like nobody coughing, nobody answering their cell phone. Like, yeah, Mom, I can't talk right now. You gotta stay focused, and there's no such thing as a data emergency. Yeah, this data is critical to organizations. Maybe even your physicians want to use it. But is your physician going to stop in the emergency department when some guy's having a heart attack and say, you know, I got to look at my report to see what I generally do in this situation? Let's hope not. If there's any MDs out there, don't look at me like clinical decision tree. Hello. Don't go there. There's no such thing as a data emergency. You have to put the fire extinguisher down. Say it with me. Put the fire extinguisher down. The thing is, if we're always chasing these emergencies, you know, the data load that we had dropped all the data with the ending in 1. We're always chasing stuff like that. Then we're always losing that meaningful perspective, right? And that practical thing where we have the resources dedicated to the project, those resources aren't really dedicated to the project. They're dedicated to firefights. And while you're looking down, fighting this fire, something like ICD-10 rolls up on you. It's really important for us to stay focused. This mantra of meaningful, practical, focused allows us the opportunity to get our work done by focusing on our tenets. So thank you, Captain Obvious. Right? You guys know all this. What you should have done is had your executives come to this. Look, I know how easy it is to stand up here and talk about this stuff. It's easy to stand up here and pontificate. The reality is really hard. These programs are really hard. You know, elbow deep in a BI implementation is not always the funnest place to be. I just said funnest. It's not always the most fun place to be. But the reality is, we have to do it. There are no superheroes out there that's going to save us, Captain Obvious or otherwise. We're going to just have to do this work the hard way. So how are we going to do it? So I have this great story about analogies. I have a boss, not the one over here, but another one, who loves analogies. And when I first started working for him, he'd had all this energy and he'd bring me into his office and he'd start talking about this analogy of a football game. And I never quite understood what he was trying to tell me, right? I don't like football. I don't get sports at all. And so he'd be giving me all these great analogies about football, and it really meant something to him, right? It was a strategy and X's and O's and people in certain positions and quarterbacks. What I know about quarterbacks probably isn't all that applicable to my job. Well, the interesting thing is I finally went to him and I said, you know what, Randy, I got to be honest with you. I'm feeling like I need to take that, like football for dummies class in order to advance my career, because I have no idea what you're talking about. So once we got past that point, we were good to go, right? But my point is, analogies only work if both people sort of understand the analogous response you're trying to get. But analogies are really effective in explaining your point. So as I was thinking about how to explain my 5 tenets here, I thought I just really need an analogy, one that most people understand. Since we're in Minnesota, I thought, hey, farming. I grew up in rural Wisconsin, by the way. So, where the men are men and the sheep are scared. So farming makes complete sense to me. The good thing is it also applies to gardening. So most of you know somebody that gardens, or you know that stuff grows in dirt. So I'm thinking this analogy is going to work for us. So let's go with it. So the first thing that we have to do is focus on data quality. Right? We have to have good data quality. Otherwise people won't adopt your system. Have you ever been in a situation where you did all this work and you got this great BI tool and there's wonderful dashboards and you talked with end users and then you pushed it out and there was a question about the data quality and that was it? It was the end, right? Everybody associated everything to that bad software release, and no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't get it back. That's why you got to focus on data quality. So the question is how? How in good gravy's name do you focus on data quality when we're talking about combining AHR data with financial data? Somebody said this morning in I think it was Jadeep and Prasanna's presentation, like 2,700 possible data points from an EHR, from standard EHR. How in the world do you do that? Talk about boiling the ocean. Okay, so we got to boil the ocean. How are we going to do that? The thing about data quality from a gardening perspective is you got to get the soil ready to accept whatever you're going to grow, right? And that your data quality is your soil. Get it right. Get the foundation right. First thing you have to do, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, assess. You got to assess it. How bad is it? How bad is your data quality? If you don't know that, you got to figure it out. Okay? So the best thing to do is take the things that are most popular, whether they're key performance metrics and dashboards, a handful of reports that people use all the time, and you go there first. Then you got to figure out how it's supposed to look from a data perspective, and then you got to figure out that gap. Right? If you don't know what a definition of a member is, like if you don't know what a definition of a member is for your organization or a patient is for your organization, cold, you probably have a gap in data quality. The most important thing is you have to assess how big it is, because then you know what the gap is and how to address it. You have to create a data governance function, but here's a trick, guys. Don't create these large monolithic organizations, because as soon as data governance becomes big like that, it fails. We have new data coming at us all the time, and if you can't go through that engine and pump it through and continue to cultivate that soil with this data quality, you're never going to get it right. So your data governance has to be very, very dynamic and agile in order to account for that. So let's just assume, and I know that was like the highest level topic on data quality. I could talk for 7 hours just on data quality alone, but you only gave me 50 minutes. We have to lead. These programs require a lot of leadership. And don't skip this step. I see that happen so many times. It's like, oh, this person really understands it. Let's put this person in charge, and maybe this executive sponsor can write a check, and we'll be good to go. You need somebody that has that vision, that really has a strategic vision for how this can change your organization. That's so important, because things are going to come up. These implementations get really messy, and you have to have somebody that's willing to jump through hoops and obstacles within your organization. You have to have that person that's only job is to look forward, because sometimes you will have firefights. And if you don't have that person always looking forward, everybody's looking down. You have to have one person that is their responsibility. You have to have lots of sponsorship. Everybody talks to you about executive sponsorship. Yay, happy, makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. You know who's really important from a sponsorship perspective? Your end users. Start thinking about your end users as sponsors. Every one of your end users are sponsors. You know why? Because if you have 50 end users that love your system and are using it and it changes their job every day, makes their life easier, they are going to be the best support system you have. You got 50 end users. I promise you no executive is going to let that program not go funded. So you got 50 end users. These are all sponsors down here. You got one executive sponsor that's signing the checks. You got to get the influencers in the middle. I call them influencers. They're the people that are working their way up throughout the organization. When stuff goes south, you can't always go to your executive sponsor. But if you have those people in the middle that have those right connections, right, you can go to them and ask them, remove the obstacles. Help me out. Introduce me to somebody. And if you have those 3 levels of sponsorship, even if your executive sponsor leaves, then you have an influencer ready to step in. And if you have all those grassroots sponsors, your end users as sponsors, your program is going to have a life of its own. You have to have that. This is you're sowing your seeds, right? You've got to plant your seeds. And your leaders and your sponsors are your seeds. Next is the technology and architecture. Okay, so don't let this be the reason your program fails. It's so easy to fix. It's so easy to fix. When you look at your technology and architecture, again, you have to assess, right? I get phone calls sometimes like, I got the system, I'm going to get it up and running. I think I'm going to have about 20 users. Okay, well, how many users are you going to have from 2 years from now? I don't know, probably 200, 250. Okay, we need to scale to the 250, not the 20. So it's a heck of a lot easier to scale down in the interim than it is to try to scale up in the future. So assess what kind of technology and architecture gap do you have, and then fill it. This is the easiest tenet to address, but you'd be surprised at how many people skip it. The architecture piece is probably the most important here, right? Anybody can go by technology. And by the way, it's the last thing you do, not the first thing you do. But from an architecture perspective, and I'm talking about data architecture here, we have to be able to focus on this. It's so foundational. It is the fertilizer, right? Which is sort of a bad analogy for technology and architecture. That's why I did Miracle Grow instead of the old-fashioned fertilizer. So I don't want my IT partners to be thinking I'm calling them fertilizer. But it's important. It's really important to have that fertilizer in there, right? That really solid data architecture structure. Because there's a couple things that you get when you do that. You get the scalability, you get the flexibility, you get the reliability. And that's what you have to be thinking about when you talk about technology and architecture. Scale for that 250. Make sure your system is flexible to respond to new stuff. And make sure it's reliable. I don't care if I log in at Saturday at noon or Tuesday at 2 o'clock. The data always has to be there. It has to be consistent. And the system always has to respond the same way. These are the easy ones to fix. But this is often the tenet that people skip over. So the value, we have to provide value. Anybody not know that? Whew, I have to kick you out. So here's the thing about providing value. It is one of those things, right? We get into our BI program, maybe we're addressing data quality, we got our leader responser, we really are pumping it, we're ready to go. We even have a list of stuff to do, we got our projects, and we're going through our projects. And then all of a sudden something really interesting happens. We get heads down. We get heads down, we're delivering our value, and we forget to look back up. So when we're done delivering that one project that took us maybe 6 months to deliver, we look up, and we're like, look at what I did. What are your end users asking you? What are your new sponsors asking you? What's next? They don't care what you just delivered. They care about what's next. And if you don't have that list queued up of what's next, you're going to be standing there like, that's a really good question. Right? So create the list. Take every request that you've ever gotten in the last 18 months and create a list. And then rate each of those requests on two things: the business impact and the technology and the difficulty from a technology perspective. How hard is it to implement? Those are the two things that you want to assess it on. Business impact can be things like, is it a regulatory compliance issue? Do customers want it? Will my, physician yell at me if I don't provide it to him or her? And then you put every one of those requests into a quadrant. Think about the magic quadrant structure, right? Everything that has a lot of business value and is easy to do from a technology perspective ends up in the green quadrant. Anything that's very low business value and is really hard to do in the technology ends up in the red quadrant. Everything else has to be assessed. You take that green quadrant and you hit it as hard and as fast as you can. And you provide value. And then you have another set of people that are looking at the yellow stuff, right, and the orange stuff and trying to figure out which one of those you can put into the green quadrant. And you have this engine that you create where you're always pumping out value to your end users. And then this is the final one, and this is tough. I can honestly say that I don't know any BA program that I've seen in the last 10 years that have actually thought about this thoroughly. And this is the idea that you need to prepare your organization to consume this information. And you might be sitting there telling me, you know what, Laura, they've been asking me for stuff for years, so I'm pretty sure my organization is ready. But the fact of the matter is, BI is asking your organization to do one thing. It's asking your organization from taking it from a decision by gut to a decision by data. And that is a major shift for your organization. And they're not going to just happily do this. I was talking to one of my clients a couple weeks ago, and he said, Laura, my organization doesn't have grain silos. It has missile silos. You've got to figure out what those missile silos are. So this is the assessment part, right, of the preparing your organization for change. Who's going to be your obstacle? What's going to get in your way? Know where those things are. You may not be able to do anything about them. You may have to ask your executive sponsor to step in. But half the battle is knowing where those things are. We're knowing where those issues are lying within your organization. Because this is a big shift for people. The reason it's a big shift, and why we don't really think about it this way, is because we're changing the ecosystem. Remember the equilibrium concept from like 4th grade science? We need all of these things in order for our ecosystem to survive. But we forget a lot of the time that we're releasing this content into this ecosystem and we throw the balance off. We have to be aware of this and know how to address that equilibrium in order to make it work. So remember that as you're getting ready to release this stuff, you have to address this part. So remember that really exciting conference I was at a couple of years ago, and I wrote up this really elaborate plan? Well, here it is, updated for you in 2011. The couple things you'll see, right, is that there's a strategy and design piece, and it just iterates through. I really like Agile BI. I think it's the way to go. So you always strategize. Sorry, I used that word. You always have to strategize and you always have to design. Every iteration, I don't care how big or small your iteration is, you have to stop and plan the work. So what I'm saying to you right now is you start that strategy and design session, right? You figure out what you're going to build. You do all your assessments. How bad is your data quality? How is your technology and architecture platform? Is your organization ready to do this? You take that whole list of all the requests you've gotten in the last 18 months and you figure out where they land on the value quadrant. You do all that work and then you figure out what you're going to deliver. And then you model it. You got to model it from a data quality perspective. You got to model it from a data structure perspective. Get your ETL architect in the room with your data architect. Modeling is just a requirements gathering exercise. Figure out how you're going to visualize that data. Begin with the end in mind, right? And then you develop it. You develop the ETL, you develop the reports, develop the dashboard, and then look at that little star. It happens like magic. Ta-da! It's all done. The iterative part, of course, is that you go right after you got done with the first strategy and design, you start another strategy and design. And you just keep going through that. And all of a sudden it becomes a little engine that you just keep pumping things through. Right? You're always strategizing the next thing. You create this roadmap and you always revisit that roadmap. You start your data governance function as soon as you're done with strategy and design. Your data governance function will perpetuate. It will go on forever and ever and ever. The interesting thing is all of us are in this situation where you see the bottom bar here. It says existing tools embedded in other systems. So by show of hands, how many of you have maybe an EHR or a financial system that has embedded BI, reports and dashboards embedded in the product itself? That's what that means. The thing is you got to think of those things as source systems. You got to get the data out of those source systems and you put it in your enterprise certified data warehouse where you control the data quality as much as possible. Right? You're never going to get rid of your EHR BI program. You're never going to get rid of your financial BI. You have to be able to control it. You have to be in charge of the data quality. You can't do that if they're all off in these little one-off applications. The problem is with this scenario is that you can't just shut one off and turn one on. So you have to iterate through. You just start creating this system, right? You start creating all this value. You create this enterprise data warehouse with certified data in it, and pretty soon you've reached the point where it starts to make sense to sunset some of those existing applications. It starts to make sense to stop letting people have access to those, and pretty soon everybody is accessing your enterprise data warehouse. But you got to iterate through before you can get to that point. And that marketing piece right there, that's preparing your organization to consume this information. So many of us don't do this. This work is really hard. You're usually heads down and then all of a sudden it's done and you want everybody to celebrate with you and nobody knows what you were doing anyway. It's not a good feeling. You got to market. You got to get out there. You got to start telling them what you're doing. You have to tell them how they can use it, even though they asked you for it. That is the craziest thing. But you got to close the gap for them. They're not really ready, and it's not their fault. It's not that they're dumb. They're busy, and data is not their job. Data is not their job. Data helps their job, but data is your job, and you got to close the gap for them. And that's what that marketing piece is. And you got to do it so much, it makes you want to throw up a little. Because my guess is most of you are probably data geeks, right? Or IT geeks, or just really geeks. I'm not seeing very many Ned's nodding. Heads nodding. Wow. So my point is, you weren't really created to be a marketer, right? You never thought about marketing your program. You have to market your program. You should be yelling at the top of the roof of what you've done and how it's going to change your organization. It's important. People aren't going to, it is not that Field of Dreams movie. Build it and they will come. It doesn't work that way. You got to tell them it's there. And then you got to tell them what you use the corn for. This is a great plan, right? Gosh. I mean, it looks so darn easy. I don't know how I managed to dedicate 13 years to it. I promise you that at least half of you in this room are like, yep. And maybe one of you are saying, she's right. Those 5 tenets, right on, but we did miss one. We did it once, but we stopped, right? I know that I make this look really easy. And I know that up here for this 50 minutes time isn't going to address all the issues that you really have. So then the question is why? Why do we do this, right? I just built you all up and I said, look at how easy it is, guys. Just meaningful, practical focus. Come on. There's just these 5 activities. I mean, how hard can it be? And kind of just slaps you back down by saying, oh, it's so easy to talk about this stuff. It's so easy to talk about this stuff. It's much easier to talk about it than it is to do it, and I know that. And so when I get in that point in my career, in my day job, and I have a lot in the last couple of weeks, right, where I've gotten completely overwhelmed, I stop and I think about why I do this work. And it's not just because Tom was nice enough to get me a job. There's more. There's more. Just stop and think about why. I've been reading this book, and I was thinking about this. Why do I do this work? So I was reading this book. It's called The Emperor of All Maladies. It's a biography of cancer. Fun topic. And I've always been a little fascinated with cancer, which is sort of a morbid thing. It might be a peek into my personality, but I digress. Because my dad, when I was a very young girl, I learned that my dad was a survivor of cancer. So I was thinking about this as I was reading this book, thinking about my dad. And he tells a story. It was 1962. He was 29 years old, and he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's type lymphoma. And he tells a story about how the doctor was almost excited about this diagnosis. He remembered bitterly the doctor almost practically skipping down the hallway after telling my dad, a 29-year-old, that he probably had about a 7-year survival rate over the next 5 years. He tells me this story about how he was put into this metal tube and radiated, cooked. He could smell the burning hair and skin. Right? Why would I tell you this story? 4 years before that, in 1958, they started what we know today as the American Cancer Society and the now technically defunct National Cancer Institute, where they first started clinical trials of chemotherapy and radiation as a treatment towards cancer. Before that, it was the wild, wild west. Nobody talked to each other. They didn't know what each other was doing. Nobody was keeping track. Nobody was sharing the data. In 1958 is when they started. And this clinical trial concept was pretty untested in and of itself at the time. So 4 short years later, when my dad was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's type lymphoma, he didn't know that he was a pioneer. He was part of this research, this clinical trial. They kept all the data on him, and they figured out what was working and what wasn't. And I'm certain that at 29, he didn't realize that he was a pioneer. He didn't realize that what he was doing, the treatment that he was getting and the research protocol that he participated in, would help save his grandson's life when he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in 2006. Do you know what did that? Data did that. Data can change everything. And that's why we do this work. And that's why we come together to talk to each other at this event every year. And that's why we get mired down in the details, and that's why we focus on data quality. Because data can change everything. Thank you. Any questions? Any heckling? Any heckling? Any hecklers? Come on. Need a little influx of energy. Am I selling copies of the book today? No, that's not a plant, I swear. I did not pay him to say that. Yes, if you're interested, we are.
I was thinking maybe sort of football the city of hockey, maybe those analogies.
I am a little bit more inclined towards hockey just maybe because of the violence, but again, another peek inside my personality. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time.